In today's episode, we're going to go over, are there better options than a physical therapy school residency? So here's kind of the problem. You graduate from PT school, and maybe you don't think you're quite ready for clinical practice. You're not quite the specialist you really desire to be, and you really desire to set yourself above your peers and become that excellent clinician. Maybe you want some extra mentoring. You might have had a clinical affiliation where you're just kind of blowing through patients and you had no guidance whatsoever. And you're not really sure if you're doing exactly what you should, right? Happens more often than we like to see. And then a physical therapy residency kind of seems like the next logical step. So, what do we do? Is a physical therapy residency where we go? And let me just drive this knife into that fresh wound if you're a new student and taking a look at your debt after you finish up with PT school. So these stats are directly from the American Physical Therapy Association. This is from several thousand PT and PTA students graduating from 2016 to 2018. PT school has not gotten cheaper since then. It's gotten more expensive. So it definitely applies to newer grads. So I'm going to read this directly because it hurts and I want you to hear it. Nearly 93% of recent physical therapist graduates are carrying debt, the average of which is $152,882 for all debt except mortgages, right? So they didn't calculate mortgages into this. And the student loan debt was going to count for $142,489 of this amount. And lastly, the average balance coming from physical therapy school debt is $116,183. That's a lot of money. And the question now becomes, can we even afford a physical therapy residency? And the other piece is that, are there any other options? Because we kind of need to start making some money and start paying down this debt, right? So in today's episode, we're going to go over, are there better options than a physical therapy residency, right? If you have a very specific population that you want to get really good at working with, is your residency going to fulfill that need or desire? From a continuing education perspective, is the residency going to cover my educational needs? And is there something else I can do to get a similar result? Next, does the location work? Can I afford to move across the country? Is there something local that's going to work out? And if not, what can I do to get some mentoring or get some more of this education without having to travel? Am I even able to get into this residency? These are tough to get into. And if I don't, can I do something different? Am I able to devote enough time and energy into a physical therapy residency? Obviously, they're very, very time intensive and you're going to learn a ton. But are there other options where I can learn more in my own time, right? Maybe I have a family and I can't afford to be away so often throughout the course of the day, especially on weekends. So if that's the case, what are my other options? Are there cheaper options, right? I mean, it's going to cost somewhere between $10,000 and $40,000 to do a physical therapy residency. And oftentimes that's in hidden costs, right? It's not like you have to pay a ton to go to school, but you get paid quite a bit less than you would if you just graduate and start working. And the last thing I'm going to cover, and this will be in a future episode, is what I did over a physical therapy residency. Okay, so be on the lookout for that. So welcome to the Fitness Pain-Free Show, where we help coaches and physical therapists like yourself get your patients out of pain and back to training in the gym where they belong. My name is Dan Pope. I'm a physical therapist. I'm a coach. I'm a personal trainer and a meathead. I love all things weightlifting and fitness related. I have my dream job as a physical therapist, coach, business owner, and educator. I've been doing this for several decades now. My goal is to help you reach your goals and hopefully get to a similar place as me, where you're happy every day, working with the folks you like, and just enjoying things in general, right? Now, if you haven't checked out the last episode, I definitely recommend checking that out before listening to this. In the last episode, we went over, should you do a physical therapy residency? Some of the key things we went over were, is a residency right for me? What are your long-term goals? Do you want to be an expert clinician? Do you want to work in a specific population or setting, or maybe you want to network with a specific organization, right? Is the physical therapy residency reasonable for me from a cost perspective, location perspective, etc.? I'll leave a link in the show notes, but I'll also allow you to click on this. If you're on YouTube right now, it should have a link right here you can click on. All right. Now we're going to go over some additional costs of PT residencies. They're kind of hidden, right? And they'll move on to whether or not they're better options. All right, let's do it. The next piece to think about is going to be student loan interest. Okay. And again, I'm not a financial advisor. I wish I knew more about this while I was in physical therapy school and even beforehand, right? I just had to figure it out the hard way after I finished up with physical therapy school. And I think that's where most folks end up, right? Because you go into PT school because people say it's going to be a great career. It seems like it's a lot of fun. You do it because you want to help people. Then you rack up some tremendous debt and you have to figure out how to pay it off once you finish up with school, right? So this is my experience. It's probably gonna be different for every single person, but I went to UMDNJ, which is a public PT school in New Jersey, and I ended up with around $100,000 in student loans when I finished up. Okay. So tuition wasn't that expensive, but the cost of living, right? Plus books, plus a curriculum, plus capitalization of loans, because most of my loans were federal loans and they were not subsidized or mostly unsubsidized. So what happens is that over the course of your PT school, your loan amounts get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until you graduate. So if you look at the price tag of a typical physical therapy school, it doesn't tell you the whole picture. All right. It'll tell you the tuition, but just keep in mind if you're borrowing money from a bank or from the federal government, which you probably are, those numbers are going to get bigger over the course of time as interest rates are high, right? Mine were between 6 and 8%, right? So every year, those loans just get bigger and they get bigger and they get bigger and they get bigger, right? So when I graduated, I owed about $100,000 in student debt. Okay. And initially, I had somewhere between 6 and 8% interest because all my loans were federal at the time. Okay. And most of those were unsubsidized. All right. So once I graduated, I was actually paying over $1,000 per month just in interest, right? Let me say that again. I was spending over $1,000 per month just in interest. And what that means is that I had to pay $1,000 every single month just to break even. I wasn't even paying into the principal of the actual loan. So if I just threw $1,000 into it every month, my loan never shrunk. It stayed exactly the same. Okay. I think that's actually relatively common for most students I work with, right? If you're lucky enough to potentially have someone pay for some of your student loans, or maybe you work a little bit through school, you can make that number a bit smaller, which I highly recommend you do. But for a lot of folks, once they leave, they've got a bucket of a really deep bucket filled with loans they have to try to figure out how to pay, right? So if you do the math, this ends up being about $12,000 a year in interest, right? And if you think about it, if you have to pay $12,000 per year in interest, you probably have to make around $16,000 because you're going to be taxed on that $16,000. So automatically you give $4,000 of that, right, over to Uncle Sam, okay, to pay off that interest, okay? So if you're sitting there making $80,000 a year, right, automatically around $16,000 of that is just paying off interest, right? Not even paying off your student loans. Okay. And I've got to say, if you finish up PT school and you start a residency and you're making around $40,000 a year, you're going to owe $16,000 just in interest to the federal government. Okay. It's going to be very, very challenging to pay off your student loans with a low salary. Okay. And keep in mind, if you go into some sort of payment plan where you're paying less than the interest every single month, then your loans just get bigger every single year. Okay. So loans capitalize over the course of time. And then once you graduate from your PT residency, you actually have a bigger loan than what you started with. Okay. So it's very important to keep that in mind. So if you're able to not make payments on your loans for one full year and your loans grow by $12,000, by the time you finish up with your PT residency, you're now looking at $112,000 you have to pay back as opposed to $100,000, right? Plus any costs that you've had with the PT residency. The next thing to think about is the time value of money. So what the heck do I mean by that? Okay. So if you were to take $40,000, which is potentially what you're losing by doing a physical therapy residency, and you just take that money and you throw it into the S&P 500, which is an index fund of the top 500 companies out there, right? And let's say on average, you make a 7% return, right? With 3% inflation. I know that inflation rates are much higher than this right now, right? At the end of the year, you make back around $3,000, okay? So here's the thing. That $40,000 that you spend for your PT residency, if you just threw that in the S&P 500 and waited for a year, you'd make $3,000 on top of that. Okay. So that's another thing that you're missing out on by spending an additional year of not getting paid. All right. The next piece is that a lot of physical therapy companies will match a certain amount of money each month. So let's say my company matches 3% of my salary. So every year I put in 3% of my salary into retirement funds, and my company will match that same amount, right? So let's say that you make $80,000 a year, and I'm putting in 3% of that salary, which is $2,400. My company will give me $2,400 to go into my retirement account, right? And that's $2,500 that you also just missed out on, right? And I do believe that some of these residency programs may have some matching programs go along with it, but keep in mind the amount that you make is going to reflect how much the company is going to give you with that match amount, right? So my question to you is, can you afford to invest in retirement with a low salary, right? And still, now here's the next piece that's a little bit complicated, right? As physical therapists, we have a lot of education before we start making money. All right. So it's 4 years of undergrad, followed by 3 years doctoral program. Okay. So when we graduate, we're now 7 years behind from a savings perspective for retirement. Okay. And what I recommend folks do when they graduate is that they start saving very quickly. Because, like I just talked about, there's a time value of money. If you put more money early on in life into savings, it's going to grow greater exponentially over the course of time. Okay. So you just missed out on 7 years of potential growth of income in retirements. All right. And now you're coming out and sacrificing another year doing that. Okay. The other piece is that you're not able to invest much, probably because you have a low income and you have high debt. So now you're missing out on another year of being able to save for retirement. Okay. It's a little food for thought because, $20,000 to $40,000 is potentially the price for this residency, but there's a lot of unforeseen costs that you lose out on when you do this for a full another year. Right. So, guys, if you like what you're learning about so far, then I want you to go and check out the Fitness Pain Free mini course. So, I made a mini course. It's absolutely free. That's the next logical step if you want to learn more from me. So, in the course, we go over 5 lessons. That first lesson is how traditional schooling has failed us, right? So, schooling is phenomenal from a physical therapy perspective, but doesn't really teach you how to work with high level athletes in the fitness world, right? Doesn't always teach you how to do the lifts appropriately. Doesn't teach you about progressions and regressions of common lifts within the gym. Doesn't teach you how to program normally, how to write rehab programs, or how to write injury prevention programs for these folks. Next thing we go over: 7 reasons why people get hurt in the gym, 4 simple steps to getting your clients out of pain, how to build the career of your dreams and earn the respect of your community. It's all well and good if you know exactly how to work with folks within the gym. But if you can't get these folks through the door on a regular basis, then you're simply not going to be living the dream that you want to, because you can't get the patients through the door that you want to work with. Okay. So I'll show you how to do that. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit about the Fitness Pain Free certification, right? So I'll leave a link in the show notes. I definitely recommend checking this out. Once you sign up for the Fitness Pain Free mini course, you will be automatically placed in the waitlist for the Fitness Pain Free certification. Now, the Fitness Pain Free certification is the course, the certification that I wish I had as a new grad, that fills in all the gaps in knowledge that you don't get in physical therapy school. So, A, you'll gain complete confidence working with injuries in the strength and fitness world. You'll learn optimal technique for both health and performance from myself and some of the best coaches in the world. You'll master programming for rehabilitation and injury prevention. Have fun while earning a whole bunch of physical therapy and physical therapy assistant credits. You have 31.5 of those. You'll also gain NSCA credits as well as CrossFit credits if you need those. This is the equivalent of a university education in working with injuries in the weight room. I really believe that. I've been adding to this thing over the past 5 or 6 years. It's massive, a ton of phenomenal information. And lastly, the biggest goal is just to fill your day with the patients you love working with and building the respect and admiration of the communities you love working with. So I'll leave a link in the show notes. Sign up for the Fitness Pain Free mini course. The certification is open 4 times per year for 1 week to enroll into. If you're on the wait list by signing up for the Fitness Pain Free mini course, I'll alert you when that next enrollment period is open and you can get started. Let's get back to the show now. The next question is physical therapy residency too challenging? Because there's a very high level of commitment. So that may mean 50 to 60 hours per week or more. If you look at some of these curriculums, there's a lot of learning that goes on. And in a lot of ways, that's great because that's what you're looking for. You're trying to be a phenomenal physical therapist. You got to put a lot of time in, right? And that is going to be split between patient care, mentoring, additional learning, so watching lectures and the like, as well as shadowing. And that's going to be shadowing seasoned physical therapists, as well as surgeons and potentially some ATCs, right, or coaches, depending on the residency program that you're involved in. And the question to ask yourself is, can you devote this time to a residency? Okay. So if you have a family, if you have kids, you might not be able to do this, or it's a major, major sacrifice and strain on the family. Maybe you have a sick family member that you have to take care of. It's very challenging to do that while you have a very big patient caseload, right? You got a lot of stuff to do. And the other piece is that, are you willing to put in the work, right? And I got to be honest, like, you shouldn't be afraid of working hard, especially early in your life. But that's something to think about because you probably won't have the same amount of time that your other friends or family do have throughout the course of the week to get other things done or take care of your own health or whatever it is, right? Another question to ask yourself is whether or not physical therapy residency is unreasonable. Okay. And what do I mean by that? There are a lot of variables in play that may or may not make the residency reasonable. One of those is going to be location. Do you have to move for your physical therapy residency? In my case, I would have had to. Now, I made the decision to stay with my wife instead, right? We probably could have split apart for 1 year and still stayed together, but that was strain that I didn't want to put on my family. So I decided against it. The other piece is that you have to actually apply for the program. It's not like they take everyone, they take very few students. So it can be pretty challenging to actually get into a residency. And lastly, is going to be the cost, right? There's a lot of unforeseen costs associated with a physical therapy residency, right? I think students look at the salaries and think, well, it's better than I'm making currently as a student, so anything is better. But you're losing out on tens and thousands of dollars when you do this. Okay, so make sure you run some calculations, figure out what your budget is, figure out what's going to cost every single month with loans, mortgage, right, rent, whatever it is, and see if it's actually reasonable. Because you might get into a position where you're losing too much money every single month and you can't afford to do it, right? And then you have to backtrack. You're in a lot of trouble. You have no money left and then you're kind of screwed. So just make sure you budget first before you go into this. So are there other better options than a physical therapy residency, right? And here's where some of my biases come into play because I said this earlier, but I actually wanted to do a physical therapy residency and I wasn't able to do one at the time, right? So I just made up my own physical therapy residency, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I think this is actually a very important question to ask yourself before you make the commitment, right? First and foremost, if you want to be really good in a very specific population or a niche, which I recommend that you do, okay, I kind of run my entire business off of this. My entire career is run off this, right? Fitnesspainfree.com. I work with fitness. It's very important to me, right? So does the residency cover the population that you want to work with? Okay. And for me, I wanted to work with more weightlifters. I wanted to work with folks in the strength world, the fitness world, CrossFit, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting. Most residency programs are not preparing you for that specifically. Okay. So if that's what you want, you might not be getting it. And that's super important that you just realize that from the get-go, right? My question to you would be, are there better places where you can find the population you want to work with? Okay. And, spoiler alert, but for me, I did a lot of coaching, right? And I did a lot of continuing education in fitness. Okay. I moved away from the physical therapy world slightly so I can get an edge in the population that I wanted to work with. Okay. But I don't think I would have gotten this within a residency program. The next piece is going to be the curriculum. Okay. Now, I recommend that whatever physical therapy residency you might be deciding to go with, you look thoroughly through their curriculum. Okay. Oftentimes it's listed on their website, but sometimes it's not. And sometimes it's kind of vague and ambiguous. I think you should really dive deep and figure out exactly what you're going to be learning. Okay. Because sometimes you get halfway through this residency program, you're like, I'm learning a lot, but this is not what I wanted to learn. Right. And it can feel like a bit of a bait and switch. And the last thing you want to do is go halfway through a residency program, realize like, this is not for me. Right. So I just recommend that you figure out what the curriculum is before you jump headfirst into it. For me, again, I love weightlifting. I love strength and fitness. Most residency programs are not going to teach me how to rehabilitate those folks. Okay. The other piece to think about is that are they covering topics that are not appealing to you? Okay. So I ended up doing an undergrad and a graduate, right? I got a doctorate. So that's 7 total years of education. And largely, I just felt like I was jumping through hoops the entire time. What I mean by that is that there's a set curriculum and you have to pass it. You have to pass the board exam in order to be a physical therapist. And I took so many courses that I did not want to take in any way, right? Just because that was part of the curriculum. Now you've already done 7 years of jumping through hoops, doing a whole bunch of stuff you probably didn't want to do. Let's make sure this next year is going to be very specific to what you want to learn about, right? Because you're going to spend a lot of money going through this program. And if you're not getting what you want education wise, then I don't think it's worth it for you. The next thing to ask about is that is the challenge of the program right for me? Okay. And are there better options out there that suit my educational needs better? So let's say that I want to learn more about strength and fitness, right? And I have a family, right? So let's say my situation, I have one child and I have a wife, I have a mortgage, right? It's kind of expensive. I don't know that I'd be able to spend 10 to 12 hours per day, Monday through Friday, and then spend a bunch of time on weekends learning more concepts, okay? And still keep my marriage and family together, right? I think my wife would probably kill me if I decided to do that at this point, okay? So not all folks are going to be able to do that. So make sure you're not taking on a commitment that you can't handle. Now, if you are single, you have all the time in the world, and all you want to do is learn more, then this might be the absolute best thing for you. But the other piece is that please think about the people around you before you go end and kind of ruin your life because you make a decision and you commit to something that you're not able to do. Okay. So I just think that's an important consideration. If you have the time, go for it. If you don't, be cautious. Right. And the other piece is that are there cheaper options to get a more catered or similar learning experience? Okay. Now, for a lot of areas of physical therapy, if there is a specific residency program like sports, right? It's going to teach you all about sports and teach you how surgeons think, teach you critical reasoning, giving you the mentoring that you want in a specific sport. I think that is absolutely phenomenal, right? You're going to gain a ton out of that. But can you not go to a physical therapy residency and get continuing education courses and maybe go to some weekend courses and maybe find some local mentors within a given sport, right? And do it at your own pace so you don't have to do it at a breakneck speed? Of course you can. All right. So if there are cheaper options that you feel are going to meet your needs better, I think that's an important consideration. You don't need to jump right into a residency program, right? You can get some other continuing education that's maybe going to suit your needs, your specific needs a little bit better. Okay. Another question to ask yourself is mentoring, right? Now, physical therapy residencies seem to be phenomenal for mentoring. It's a big strength of the program. My question for you is that are there better places where you can get expert mentors, improve your skills in your specific niche? So, an example for me is that when I finished up physical therapy school, I wanted to be better working in the CrossFit population. So, one of my mentors, and I had many, is I actually found the best CrossFit gym at the time, which was CrossFit Verve out in Denver, Colorado. The owners were Matt and Cherie Chan, and then Eric Clancy and Courtney Shepard a little bit later. And these guys were phenomenal coaches, and I interned there, right? So, I shadowed there even though I had been a CrossFit coach for years previously. I shadowed there for months until I became a CrossFit coach. And that experience and that mentoring was invaluable, right? Because I wanted to work with more CrossFit athletes. So for me, I think I got really great mentoring from a physical therapy slash fitness perspective that was specific to the population I wanted to improve my skills with just by getting some outside mentoring and not going with a physical therapy residency. Okay. The other area to think about is shadowing. Are there better places where you can shadow expert clinicians in the population that you want? Okay. So if you do a physical therapy residency, you're probably going to have very good access to, let's say, surgeons, and you'll be able to shadow with them, ask them questions, which is not something you can easily come by otherwise. Okay. But is there a local surgeon that works in the population that you want, i.e., CrossFit? You can go and shadow and ask questions. I did this a lot early in my career. I found some local surgeons that were experts and saw a lot of patients in the population that I wanted, let's say CrossFit. I went to patient appointments. I shadowed them during their outpatient hours. I went and watched surgeries that they performed, and I became kind of good buddies with them. And I felt like that was a great way for me to learn. They costed, very little money. Okay. So, are there better places where you can shadow expert clinicians in the population that you want? Because there may be. So, let's recap here. Should you do a physical therapy residency? Well, there are three major questions to ask. So, first and foremost, what are your long term goals? Where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15 years? Is there a specific population that you want to work with? Is it CrossFit? Is it Olympic weightlifting, right? Is there a specific setting? Do you want to work in a small practice, big practice? You want to be surrounded by expert clinicians, right? Is there a certain community that you want to be serving, right? What kind of hours you want to be working? Would you rather work kind of part time and fill the rest of your hours with, let's say, some sort of entrepreneurial business approach, programming, coaching, whatever it is? Do you want to do 40 plus hours per week, right? Do you want to work 2 days a week, 4 days a week? All those things are important, right? Are you trying to get some mentoring and continued education in a specific niche that's unrelated to physical therapy? So, is that business or maybe public speaking or publishing? Because oftentimes with a residency, you're going to get that very catered knowledge, right? It comes from working with experts in that realm, right? You may not be able to get that otherwise. Are you looking for specific mentoring or networking, right? So maybe you really need access to the best physical therapist in the world when it comes to, let's say, baseball. And the way to do it is by doing a physical therapy residency, right? Maybe you want to network with certain folks and allow you to work in NFL or NBA. And if a residency allows you to do it, then awesome. I think that's a great choice. Next question. Does the residency fulfill my needs? Okay. You got to figure out, what are your needs? Why are you going to a residency, right? Are you trying to become an expert as a physical therapist? And if the residency allows you to do that, great. Is the physical therapy residency going to allow you to work with the population you desire? Because that's super important. If you go in and you want to try to work with wrestlers, but you work with all ballet, yeah, that's not really what you want. Okay. So just make sure that they're working in the population that you really desire. Okay. And this kind of goes back to my earlier point, but are you able to network with folks that are going to advance your career? If you want to work in the NBA, you should be around folks that are involved in the NBA or know folks in the NBA that can just reach out and say, hey, I got this buddy. His name is Dan Pope. I think he'd be a great fit for this job you have open, right? And that would be phenomenal. So if the residency has those opportunities, then yeah, that's going to be a no-brainer. And lastly, I think you just make sure you ask yourself, are there better options out there? And I got to tell you, there's no simple options I know of right now. I actually am trying to fulfill that niche myself with the fitness pain-free certification. So folks that really want to learn more about strength and fitness, and they feel like they didn't learn everything they needed to with physical therapy school, my fitness pain-free certification does a great job of handling that. Okay. But you want to just figure out if there are any other better options for you besides taking that deep dive straight into the residency program, right? So think about, is there a specific population that I want to work with that I don't see available in any physical therapy residency out there, right? Am I prepared to the level of commitment that's going to be associated with a physical therapy residency? It's a lot of work. You have to really, really dive deep. Am I ready to make that time commitment to the physical therapy residency? Because they seem like they're all inclusive. It seems like you have to be all in, lots and lots of hours every single week, not a lot of free time. If that's what you want, great. If not, you may have to look at other options. Okay. And then lastly, the cost. These things are not cheap. And I'll tell you what, there are some residencies that are much cheaper than others. So if you find one that kind of meets all of your needs and it's much cheaper, I'd recommend going that way. Because a lot of these residencies can be quite expensive, right? And they're unforeseen costs, right? So it's not like they cost $100,000, right? They basically just don't pay you very much, and you get mentoring and a lot of learning in return. Okay, so the cost is basically the amount of money that you would have made if you were going to be working in a standard job as soon as you graduated. Okay, which can be upwards of 50% of the salary, right? So make sure you keep that in mind. So, guys, that is it for the lesson today, but that is not it for your learning. So, when you graduate as a physical therapist, sometimes you're not in your dream job, and I get it. It takes a lot of effort to work in the population you want and really look forward to the patients that you see every single day. So I made a lesson for you. It's another fitness pain-free show. It's called 5 Steps to Earning the Respect of Your Community and Building the Career of Your Dreams. We'll just dive deep on this subject so you can start working with the population that you love. This way, every single Sunday, you won't have the Sunday scaries because you don't want to go into work Monday morning because you got a whole bunch of patients on your panel that you don't feel like working with. Let me show you how to track the population that you love working with. So every single day, you love your life, right? And you love your work. So go ahead and click on this link above and get started on that lesson. So that is it for today's Fitness Pain Free show. On the next episode, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this question of whether or not you should do a physical therapy residency and what I did instead. Stay tuned. Lastly, thank you so much for your support. You truly allow me to do what I love for a living. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that like button. Comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Am I missing anything? Have you done a residency? Do you feel differently than me? I would love to hear your comments on this. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you're listening to the podcast version of this video, please leave me a positive rating and review. It helps me out tremendously. If you want to go that extra step and support me further, please consider subscribing to Fitness Pain Free Insiders. It's a comprehensive educational resource and toolkit for the fitness and rehab professional. Think Netflix, but for trainers and physical therapists. It's premium content from me. I update this every month. I've been doing it for the past 5 years. It's an absolute ridiculous amount of information. You've got over 100 webinars, ebooks, and complete guides. You have access to a private Facebook group to have all your questions answered by me. You can decide some upcoming podcast topics. I'd love to answer questions that you have. So you get started for $1 for a week trial. After that, it's $12.99 per month, right? Dirt cheap. It is a no-brainer if you want to try to learn more from me. So I'm going to leave a link in the show notes. You can check that out. You can also head to fitnesspainfree.com, click on the programs link, and click on Fitness Pain Free Insiders Online Library to get started. All right. You won't be disappointed. And lastly, here are the references. So what I did was I put a link to the University of Delaware residency program, as well as MGH's sports residency programs. I think they're both phenomenal residency programs. So if you want to learn a little bit more, I recommend clicking on those and just get acquainted and see what they have to offer. Right. So if you want to play around with an interest calculator, see how much money you could have made as opposed to going to physical therapy residency, then go ahead and click on that. Otherwise, thanks a lot, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.